2 years ago, I was sitting in this chair and I was chatting with both Frank Justra and Grant Williams, and we were talking about the record central bank gold buying. However, everybody was complaining that the gold price hadn't responded yet. And then a year ago, I was sitting here talking about the gold price responding, and everybody was complaining that the miners hadn't responded yet. 6 months ago, same conversation. The best-in-class miners were beginning to hit 52-week highs, some all-time highs. I'm talking about the Agnico Eagles and the Wheaton Precious Metals. But people were complaining that the explorers and developers hadn't responded yet. So I hope I've painted that picture to my audience right now that this is where we are in the market. And as a consequence, I'm very focused on ensuring I have sufficient exposure to the high quality explorers and developers. And it's still a time to be very disciplined, but I think if you can find projects that have a resource, so they're not just a drill play, they have cash, they're capitalized, so they can actually expand that resource over the upcoming summer, put together aggressive work programs and come back to the market with news and hopefully capitalize on some market sentiment and momentum come fall. And fourth, they're in a great jurisdiction. And your company, Sitka Gold, ticks all four of those boxes. You have the resource, over 1 million ounces and indicated, another 1 million and inferred. You got 25 million in the bank. You are completing a 30,000 meter drill program this summer, and you're in the Yukon, a phenomenal jurisdiction. I want to start actually with the Yukon. Let's start there because you spent so much of your life up there. And I could say that this is one of the most minerally endowed geographies on the continent. And my audience would be familiar with things like the Eagle Mine, the Fort Knox Mine. They've probably watched Snowline's results over the last year and a half, some phenomenal grades. But you're up there, and you've been up there a long time. So if someone was absolutely unfamiliar with the geology of the Yukon, what would you tell them, and why is it such a significant location for the gold mining sector?
Yeah, I have been in the Yukon a long time. I first went up there as a geology student in 83. So you can see where the gray hair comes from. And I moved up there after I graduated to work in a little gold mine. And the Yukon, like everywhere, goes through cycles of exploration. And this last cycle with low gold prices, it's allowed some companies to kind of focus in on their projects and advance them in a methodical way. The one thing that's unique about the Yukon is when you look at it in the context of the west coast of North America, right? BC, Yukon, Alaska.
Okay.
You look in BC, lots of major mines. You look in Alaska, a lot of major mines. You look in the Yukon, it's had mines, but no great big ones, no big ones. It's got world-class geology, so there's this bit of a gap.
Okay.
And geology doesn't work in gaps. There's a reason that gap is there, and it's probably less exploration over the years than BC or Alaska.
Okay.
And that's been the case, when you look at modern exploration, which is only the last couple decades, you have a summer winter season in the Yukon. That's been prohibited historically mostly because of communication and, modern technology, comfort in building camps and living. So there's been a gap there. And that's why the Yukon is very prospective for brand new discoveries. And Sitka Gold, in an area that was, known to have gold, the Clear Creek area where we're focused has had lots of placer mining for 100 years. The gold didn't fall from the sky. It came from the ground. People have poked around, advanced the project, but it wasn't till 2020 till Sitka did drilling on some new targets that they made the discoveries that highlighted, oh, there is a gold resource here at a good grade. And, in that same context, you mentioned Snowline Gold. Around the same time, Snowline Gold was getting going and made the fantastic discovery over at the Valley Gold deposit. And those two things kind of happened at the same time. New discoveries in an area that you think has been explored, a lot, but there's a lot of new stuff to be found there.
It's really interesting, your comment on effectively the Yukon being somewhat overlooked as a consequence of either seasonality, limited technology, maybe just, capital tends to chase excitement. There's been a lot of excitement in BC and Alaska, but as a result, there's still a lot of prospective opportunity in the Yukon.
Absolutely. If I look at the last decade, I'll start with Sitka Gold discovering the Blackjack and Eiger deposits in an area that's seen, historical mining, placer mining, Snowline Gold, their discovery back in the day, Attack Resources, just a little northwest of Snowline, finding the Carlin-style deposits, the White Gold discovery back in 2008. There's been a lot of recent discoveries of stuff that's sticking out of the ground.
Right.
And so you think, well, the old timers, the Klondike Gold Rush, old timers, prospectors have been there forever. They've crawled all over the ground. What's been found has been found, but that's not the case in the Yukon.
No.
And, I can think back to, the 80s when I started doing work. You didn't see many companies working in the winter because all we had for communications was, it's called a 4441 single sideband radio that, in the summer, you're lucky if you got out sometimes, right? So as far as safety and supplies, all that kind of stuff, it just didn't really happen. But then starting in the 90s, we're starting to get satellite radios. If you're running out of food or you have an emergency, you can call somebody up, take care of it.
Yeah.
So we started seeing the exploration season get longer.
Sure.
So I always use the analogy that, up until the 90s, the exploration season in the Yukon was 3 months long. So you might go, there's been 40 years of exploration in that area, but you got to divide it by 4.
Yeah.
Because it's only a quarter of the year.
No, that's really important context.
Yeah, it's prospective ground, and I think our project is a really clear example of that. Prospectors were up there, we're only 2 hours out of Dawson.
Yeah.
So we're not in the heart of the Klondike. We're peripheral to it, but you can be guaranteed that there were prospectors that found gold in the creek around the Clear Creek area where our RC Gold project is. Yeah. So they knew about it, and people poked around in the hills, and even in the 50s, Hugh Bostock, Geological Survey of Canada, geologists noted these intrusions up in the heads of the creeks that, likely was kind of the source of the gold. So people have known about the prospectivity, but, the discoveries really didn't happen until the late 80s with the discovery of Fort Knox in Alaska.
Right. Okay. And then, I always reflect on the fact that for the last 12 years, the industry in general has been starved of capital. And so there's just been less happening. And we're starting to see that ramp up again now. Let's talk about your projects, RC Gold. We'll talk about RC Gold in the Yukon. You've got the cash in the bank right now, $25 million. You're participating in a 30,000 meter drill program this summer. You put out some preliminary results already, end of April, early May. They were very impressive. End of April was the highest grade results in the company history. So again, somebody's just walking in fresh to the Sitka story. Let's catch them up to date over the last few months, Mike. And then I want to get into what you're planning and the asset itself a little bit.
Yeah, the first drilling, just to go back a little more in a few months, was 2020.
Yeah, okay.
Starved for capital. You're absolutely right. Corp, our CEO, really worked hard to get enough capital to go in there. He's got a long history in the Yukon. He's a geologist as well, knew the potential, had enough money to drill 6 holes, and 2 of those holes hit both the Blackjack and the Eiger that are now deposits. We haven't drilled them off yet. So,
and Blackjack's the highlight right now.
That's right. Blackjack is a higher grade of the 2 deposits.
Yeah.
We're geologists. We go where grade is best. Grade is really king in any deposit, whether you're talking about gold, copper, silver, whatever. Grade is super important. And then to boot, we have size. So, he was lucky in that, his geological concept proved out. They hit some really nice drill holes. We're able to keep raising capital, but 2020, 21, how tough the times were.
Yeah.
Everybody recognized that he was onto something good, but it was tough to raise capital. but we were able to raise enough capital to keep the project going. And then, of course...
Why? Can I press you on that? Because a lot of companies weren't able to. And I always joke in the exploration business, the most important resource isn't the rock, it's the cash. It's the oxygen. Everything else stops if you can't raise capital.
Yeah.
You guys have been able to do that. Your peers have not.
Well, we're in I would call a de-risk belt of rocks. We mentioned the Fort Knox mine in Alaska. That was, discovered in the late 80s, went into production in the 90s. There's a belt of rocks that stretches across Yukon and Alaska called the Tombstone Gold Belt. It's basically a bunch of granites that formed at almost the exact same time, around 92 million years ago, and they're very rich in gold. So they stretch across Yukon and Alaska. When Fort Knox was discovered, some smart geologists, including Robert Friedland, moved over into the Yukon and started checking out those rocks in the Yukon. And that's when they discovered things like the Dublin Gulch deposit that turned into the Eagle Mine.
That's right.
Brewery Creek, Gold Dome, there's a bunch of different targets. Clear Creek was an area that Bema Gold first worked in the 80s. And that's, the B2 Gold guys, Clive Johnson and all those guys were up there. It's interesting bit of history. So this belt of rocks is recognized as hosting large, low-grade gold deposits, Fort Knox being the first one.
And when you say low-grade, Fort Knox was like 0.9 grams per ton when they started mining, and now it's like 0.3 grams per ton?
I looked back, and actually their starting grade before pre-production was 0.83.
0.83.
And they had about 4 million ounces of gold, and now they've just produced 9 million ounces of gold. They've been operating for almost 3 decades, 27 years. Started out at 0.83 milling, classic kind of mine. Now they have a low-grade 0.3 gram per ton grade. So it just shows you the size and length that these deposits can be. And so back in 2020, it wasn't long that Snowline made their valley discovery. We made our discovery. The Eagle Mine was going into production. So these deposits have shown that they have the size, and plus with rising gold prices, what used to be considered low grade is now worth a lot of money. Like, you take the Blackjack deposit, its grade is about 1 gram per ton.
About 1 gram per ton. Yeah.
So you put that in the context, 1 ton of rock is worth $100 US. And how much is a ton of rock? Have you ever, the quick way to figure out tonnage is you times length times width times depth in meters. So a 1 by 1 by 1 meter cube of rock is 3 cubic meters. And then you multiply it by specific gravity. Specific gravity of rock is around 3. So a 1 meter cube is about 3 tons of rock. It's $300 US. That adds up pretty quick when you have a bulk tonnage situation, which these Tombstone deposits are. They're large deposits that used to be considered low grade, but not with the prices of gold now.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it adds up really quick. And so the recognition that, we're exploring for this style of deposit that has the ability or the potential to build gold ounces really quick, is significant. And then of course, the Valley Gold discovery, right? If you look at Fort Knox, like we said, 0.83. The Eagle Mine started out at 0.63. Banyan Gold's looking at about a 0.6 gram per ton grade. They're working on the higher grade portions of that to bring it up. But then they found Valley Gold, started out around 1.5. Their most recent update is 1.21 grams per ton. So these deposits now have shown that they're not necessarily in that less than 1 gram per ton range. They can be higher than 1 gram per ton range. Certainly Snowline and the Valley Gold discovery dominated the industry and dominated the Yukon story in the last few years, rightfully so.
That was about 1.5 grams per ton on average? Okay.
But we were quietly working away in the background knowing that we were onto a higher grade deposit as well. And so we knew that people would realize that. We're just like the Energizer Bunny working away in the background, nose down, drilling this thing off, showing its potential. And that's where we're at now with rising gold prices, with some of the great results we had last year that clearly demonstrated in the Blackjack that we were onto a higher grade system as well.
Yeah.
We were able to raise money, and now we're doing as much drilling this year as has been done since 2020 on the entire property.
You're going hard this summer, which is really exciting. And, we'll keep your news flow very consistent as we get into the fall. You're cashed up to complete. So just for context, back to the sort of north-south orientation of the RC project, up in the north is the Eiger and the Blackjack. And the majority of the value you've discovered thus far has been in the Blackjack. And we said, I think 2.8 million ounces in your resource, and over 1 million of that's indicated right now. And the majority of that's in the Blackjack target. You've got 30,000 meters planned this summer. As I understand, you're going to spend half of that up in the north, continuing to learn more about that resource. And then you're going to distribute. So here's my question. Are you going to wait and see what you find up there before you decide how to allocate the other half of the drill program, the other 15,000 meters, or walk me through that?
Yeah, not at all. Good question. So, I mentioned these are intrusive hosted deposits, so they're in granite bodies, and a little adjacent to them too. But we have 11 of these granite bodies on our property. So the Blackjack and Eiger are in
11 targets.
Yeah. And so the Blackjack and Eiger are in two separate intrusions up in the north part of the property. They're about 2 kilometers apart. We focused on the Blackjack because it's been the higher grade of the two. And as you mentioned, 1.3 million ounces in the indicated category at a gram.
Average grade of that 1.3?
1.27 grams per ton.
Okay.
1.3 million ounces in the indicated. So that's a higher confidence. It's been drilled tighter spacing.
Yeah.
The inferred resource is just 1.01 million ounces at a grade of 0.93. So you combine the two and it's, average it out. So we're just around a gram over 2 million ounces.
Okay.
So now, the Eiger, we haven't drilled there since 2021. And so both the Blackjack and the Eiger, we haven't drilled those deposits off. So that's where we're allocating half of our drill budget to keep trying to figure out how big are these. So we've got 3 drills working there right now, but we also have a couple other intrusions that you mentioned, the Pukelman and the Rosgobble. They're 2 and 5 kilometers south, totally separate intrusions. And we've drilled holes in there, and there's been some historical drilling back in 2010 and 2011 around there, and even earlier, that show that they're gold bearing as well. We did some holes last year that really showed the potential for those to host deposits as well. So that's where we're allocating the other half of those exploration dollars.
Okay.
To look at, definitely now with the money we have, the 25 million and the drill budget, we can step out into these more peripheral targets with the goal of defining, an initial resource in those areas as well. And we have the budget and the drills and the people to do that.
Now, if I were to ask you this, Mike, historically, the resource you found has been relatively near surface, right? But now you're exploring with a lot more depth. What's the significance of that, and why are you doing that?
Yeah, well, we're doing that because it kept going. As you're drilling, you don't stop until you get out of your deposit. So it's still open. It's open in lots of directions, including at depth. And as we were drilling deeper, we started getting narrower intersections, but higher grades.
Yes.
You mentioned, our one drill hole in our winter program in this year hit 45 meters at 4.5 grams per ton gold at, over 600 meters depth. Well, you're not going to open pit that.
Very deep. Yeah.
Yeah. But those are the types of grades that could support an underground operation.
Because you need those higher grades to warrant an underground mine.
Exactly. It's a little more expensive to mine underground.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's where that kind of potential is really kicked off and let us, continue to look at the depth potential of this. So it gives optionality to the project. There's plenty of deposits worldwide that have had both open pit and underground components to them.
Mhm.
So to have that optionality adds a kind of a different layer to the project.
Yeah.
And it's one thing, these intrusion hosted deposits, you know, you always have to have a geological model that you follow. And the model always breaks and you rewrite the script. And
Right.
for this blackjack deposit, you know, we've now drilled, you know, a hole that's almost 1 kilometer deep, and we're waiting for assays on that.
Okay.
But it's going really, you know, it's got really interesting depth potential, you know, and you know, if we hit grades like that, 45 meters, 4.5 grams, it doesn't take long to build a lot of ounces, especially in a large scale. So you can look at bulk underground mining methods, and that can be very attractive just all on its own.
Sure. So you're at this moment right now where we're going to get answers to a lot of unanswered questions.
Exactly.
We're going to learn a lot.
With the amount of drilling that we're doing, as we mentioned, you know, to the end of 2024, we drilled 25,000 meters.
Yeah.
You know, since the get-go, we're doing 30,000 meters. So it's going to give us a really, you know, good idea of the size of the blackjack and the Eiger, you know, because that's a lot of drilling focused on them. Will we drill them off totally? Probably not, but we'll have a good idea of the size of them.
Yeah.
And then on these two other target areas, Pukaman and Rosgobble, the amount of drilling there, we'll have a good idea of an initial resource there.
Yes.
So hopefully our drilling defines 2 additional resources. And then we would have, you know, within this cluster of intrusions, we've drilled 4 different intrusions. And hopefully at the end of the day, we have an idea. Do we have 4 deposits? Do we have 3, you know?
Yeah.
So what's the overall potential? Because you come to a point where you can't drill off everything totally before you have to make your mind up about, you know, the potential of your mine, or do you go to the next phase, or do you, you know, really attract the interest of other folks when you show the potential of this area to host, you know, a bunch of significant deposits. Because like we mentioned, Fort Knox, before they started mining, 4 million ounces at 0.83. They've now mined over 9 million ounces. Valley Gold just updated their resource. They're up around 8 million ounces.
Okay.
The Eagle Mine, before they started mining, 4 million ounces. Banyan Gold at Ormac, 7 million ounces. So all these deposits can be large. And we have a cluster of 11 intrusions that each have that potential to host a deposit. So, you know, if we can demonstrate clearly that we've got multiple deposits, we have 2. Our goal by the end of the year is to have 4.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden, we're going to get a lot of interest, because that could add up to a lot of ounces. And so we want to demonstrate that potential.
Yeah, that makes sense. At what point would you make the decision it's time for an updated resource estimate?
Yeah, at the end of this year. I mean, we've done 2 resource estimates on the blackjack. The first one was in 2023, and then we did one in January of 2025.
Yeah.
So with this 30,000 meters, we'll definitely have enough data. Yeah. So typically, like you say, we've got 3 drills going right now, 4th one on the way. We have news flow all through the year. We usually have all our drill results. We drill into October. We have all our drill results in hand by December, and the last 2 resource updates we've done, we've been able to do those by the end of January. So that would be our target, first quarter of 2026 to update the known resources and hopefully publish a couple new ones.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. So just to recap the conversation thus far, doubling the drilling the company's done to date since 2020 anyways, over the next few months. We're going to learn a lot about what's down there. We've got 2 deposits. We're hoping for 4. We're going to find out in the near term. And prospective shareholders can expect news flow pretty consistently, because you have 3 drills on property right now. And I think you're adding a 4th. You're trying to add a 4th? Yeah. Okay. So lots of work being done. That means lots of news. That means lots of answers to the unanswered questions. I love that. We like the jurisdiction, programs fully capitalized. You know, so the focus has been on the RC Gold project in the Yukon. That's all we've discussed, and that makes all the sense in the world. just for context, for anybody who's freshly walking in, you've got some optionality as well in that you have other assets in good jurisdictions, actually, like Nevada, Arizona, and Nunavut, Northern Canada.
Yeah.
We're not focused on those right now, but anything you want to share on maybe the Nunavut property or what the strategy might be there for your three other assets?
Yeah, I mean, they're great assets. And obviously in 2020, when the Blackjack discovery was made, 2021, our focus really narrowed and honed in on the Yukon. But we have those three other assets that you mentioned. Coppermine River is up in Nunavut. Yeah.
Nunavut, yeah.
And so it's a copper discovery that Corp, our CEO, and Don Penner, our president, made. It's about 60 kilometers south of Kugluktuk, which is on the Arctic coast. Kugluktuk is a deep water port, daily jet service. So yes, we're way up north, but as far as location goes, it's a great location. It's a sediment-hosted copper discovery. Now, Coppermine River area, huge stake and rush back in the 60s. Lots of copper discovered, showings all over the place, but, frozen year-round.
Right.
The Northwest Passage is starting to open up.
Yeah.
Don and Corp, back in 2014, I believe it was, they had a company called Tundra Copper. They went up, they partnered up with another copper geologist, started looking up around there, staked a bunch of ground, and before they could take Tundra Copper public, Kaizen Resources, one of Robert Friedland's companies, bought them out. Mm-hmm. So they've been working up there. And then after a couple of years, there was another area that we've now staked called Coppermine that Don and Corp went back, did some work on, made the discovery. We're going to drill that this year. We're capitalized enough that we've done some geology, some geochem. We've traced this zone of copper mineralization in the sedimentary rocks up to 14% copper, 60 grams silver, so very rich material. Sediment-hosted copper deposits around the world. There's them in Africa. They can be very big and high grade. So the target is something very significant. It's never been drilled. So that's where we're going to get up there, do a small drill program just to unleash the value of that. So that's one program that we're doing. Alpha Gold is in Nevada and Burke Creek is in Arizona, both great jurisdictions. Alpha Gold is in the Cortez Hills Trend, only 60 kilometers south of Cortez Hills Mine Complex, 4 Mile, Gold Rush. There's some, huge deposits there. So we're in elephant country. That's an area where our geologist, we have a Nevada geologist, career guy down there, felt the area was mapped wrong and that the rocks that host Gold Rush and those other deposits to the north of us existed on the Alpha property. He looked at some oil drilling and some geothermal drill holes that kind of trigged him onto that. So we've done a bit of drilling there over the last 5 years, kind of 5,000 meters, proved his geological concept right by doing this wide space drilling to see if we could encounter those same rocks that host the deposits to the north. Yeah. And we did. And those rocks also have good sniffs of gold in them, as well as all the Carlin type indicators. There's 2 horizons. The lower one is the more prospective. We only drilled the upper one. So there's a great kind of geological potential there, but obviously focused on the Yukon. So that one's sitting there. And then Burke Creek as well is it's got a historical resource, gold, silver vein, comes out on surface, 120,000 ounces of gold, 5 million ounces of silver, nearly went back in production back in the 1980s. So it's been sitting there a long time. Again, our focus is up in the Yukon. That one's ready to drill. We received a drill permit. The vein itself is on private lands, but it's never been drilled where it goes off onto the public, the BLM lands. Got the permit for that last year, so it's kind of ready to go as well. So very low carrying costs on these projects. They're all 100% owned by Sitka. There's no work commitments, anything like that. Got it. So we've got a lot of optionality looking at, folks are always knocking on the door, kicking tires
Yeah.
to have a look at these things. So we'll look at ways of monetizing them.
Yeah.
But they're great projects. So Sitka's, always had a goal of being diversified as far as, being in great jurisdictions where we can always work, as well as a bit of that mix of commodities. So that's what those other projects add to the value of Sitka, although they're probably not getting much value recognition with us now. But, we're
people's eyes
working
go
on
to where
that.
the action is, right? And, it makes sense. RC is driving the value. I like the optionality because it's like an option on liquidity. Should you need that in the future? Seems like you've been very effective at raising capital without that. So it's there for other reasons should you want to. And preliminary exploration happening. The copper project in Nunavut's really interesting to me. You're far north, but there's a deep water port up there. And the copper story is just quite compelling right now, how it's unfolding. And before we hit record, we were chatting about the Resolution mine in Arizona, right? Which has been trapped in permitting for like 25 years and now looks like it might be moving forward. Because in the last 10 years, like where copper mines have come from, the Congo, Peru, Panama, that's really it. There hasn't been like a tier 1 jurisdiction copper project come online in a very long time, which is interesting. So look, Mike, I really appreciate you coming in today and getting this story in front of my audience. I like it because we're not going to have to wait very long to get an update on the story, right? There's lots happening right now and it's happening quickly. So I'd love to get you back on in the near future, get an update maybe towards the end of the summer. Anything else you want to share with myself or my audience today before we?
No, I think, in some ways when you hit a dry, long stretch like there has been in the junior mining industry. We talked about that money flow not coming down. I think what happens in those times, and I've seen it happen a few times, is, if the geologists don't have money to drill, what they do is think, because thinking is free, right? And so I've seen it before. I've got pictures when I was a regional geologist for the Yukon, where I've got company CEOs under a tarp looking at old drill core, thinking about their project because they know the cycle is going to change and money's going to come back and they have to deploy that smartly, right?
Yeah.
And so, we've been able to raise capital during these tough times, but deploy it very smartly, methodically, slowly, at the same time thinking, oh, this is going to turn around, right? We're geologists. We're optimists.
Of course.
We know it's going to turn around.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for that day when that does, but we've done our homework. We've done our homework for more than 5 years. We've been waiting for this to happen. And so now we've been given the ability to do it. We're not a bank. People gave us money to discover gold with. We've done that before, and that's what we're going to do again. And so we've had that time to really think hard about when that beautiful day comes where we're able to raise enough capital to fully deploy our ideas.
Yes.
So we've had our nose to the grindstone. We've been working hard. Got a really bunch of smart, hardworking people, young and old, working for us.
Yeah.
So we're really looking forward to it. And we'll have an incredible news flow starting very quickly now, running, like I said, all the way to Christmas and then into next year.
Yeah.
And we're really excited about showing the potential of this project to the world.
I love that. And you're so right. It's so important what you do in the down years, right? You see a lot of companies kind of batten the hatches and wait, right? Wait for the market to resuscitate, investor sentiment, all this stuff. Companies that stay busy, stay grinding during those very tough years are often the ones that end up setting the high water mark when the sentiment turns.
Yeah, and that's, that applies to us and it applies to a lot of other companies. That's where we always talk about management companies. We have a very technical group. Our CEO is a geologist, our president, I'm the VP corporate development, I'm a geologist.
Yeah.
So we're a technical group. So when we don't have money, we think.
You think.
And there's, if you're looking at other management, other companies, I think that's an important consideration because there's a lot of other people out there that have been thinking about the day where they're going to get capital too. So there's Sitka Gold and there's a bunch of others that are well-managed technical thinkers that are really looking forward to the ability to follow up on their ideas.
I love it. Mike, thanks again. Thanks so much for coming in today.